بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين سيما الحجاب بقية الله الأعظم روحي وأرواحنا له فداء ولعن دائم على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So one of the aspects of our lives that we normally have a tendency to underestimate is what we have an affection for and what we fall in love with. Just to give an example, if you look at the personality of a human being, what is the personality made of? The personality of a human being is made of habits, as they call it. And habits, it's an action that is being done on a regular basis until it becomes a habit, and afterwards it becomes a part of your personality. But what action you actually do throughout your life is depending on what you have an affection for. Just to give an example, if a person has a strong attachment to his wealth and he prevents himself from giving out from that wealth, he becomes a greedy person. When he does that on a regular basis, it becomes a habit for him. When it becomes a habit, it afterwards becomes a part of his personality. And the same goes the other way around. If a person has a strong affection for helping out other people, poor people, orphanage for example, and to help orphans or other people that are poor, he gives out from his wealth until it becomes a habit. When he does it on a regular basis and it becomes a habit, then afterwards it becomes a part of his personality. So what defines and determines your personality in reality? That's what you have an affection for, what you fall in love with. If we can't say it determines it, at least we can say it's under influence by what you have an affection for, what you fall in love with. And it's not only limited to your personality, the same goes for your knowledge as well. If you think about it, when you have a strong attachment to a certain thing, but it contradicts the knowledge that you actually have, normally you're ready to sacrifice that knowledge in order to protect what you're attached to protect what you fall in love with. Just to give an example that is very clear for a lot of people, for example, a person with an addiction, for example, a drug addict, that's a good example that you can give. A person who has a strong attachment for his desire or to the pleasures that lies within taking drugs, he knows that taking drugs is damaging for this person. He knows that there's a possibility that he's going to lose his family. He knows there's a possibility that he's going to lose his job. He knows that there's a possibility that he's going to die from an overdoses. But even though he has a strong knowledge, and he has a lot of knowledge about these things, because that strong love and that attachment that he has for taking drugs or the pleasure in taking drugs, he's ready to sacrifice or at least dismiss or don't accept the knowledge that he actually have. And therefore he sacrificed that knowledge in order to protect what he's attached to. And the other way goes around as well. If a person has a knowledge about an individual, or he's strongly attached to an individual, he wants to seek knowledge about that person as well. He wants to see how he walks, how he talks, because he wants to imitate that person. So sometimes a strong attachment to something or a desire for something can even get you to sacrifice your knowledge. And if not, it's going to sacrifice your knowledge. You're going to seek knowledge based on what you're attached to. So it has a huge influence on what you actually seek knowledge about, or how you actually treat that knowledge that you have. Because it's not only about having knowledge. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He mentions people with a lot of knowledge, that don't act up upon it, even though that they have a lot of knowledge, He calls them كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. He calls them donkeys that are carrying around a lot of books. Why? Because they have a strong attachment to certain things which make them oversee or don't accept that knowledge they actually have, or taking that into consideration. And that's why you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout all of the Quran, all the verses we have from the Holy Quran, He always tells human beings to be careful of what we get affected by, what we have an affection for, what we fall in love with. Because it's going to have a huge influence not only on our personality but also on how we're going to use the knowledge we actually have. In a beautiful verse from the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, مَا جَعَلُ اللَّهُ لِرَجُلٍ مِّن قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not made for man two hearts in his interior. In other words, you should be careful what you get attached to. Because if you have an attachment to something, if you affect it or have an affection for something, you cannot, if that affection is bad for you, you cannot at the same time have an affection for what's good for you. They cannot coexist within the same heart. Because you only got one heart. So you should be careful what you get attached to, what you have an affection for. And it's also the movement that starts within a human being are also under the influence of what you have an affection for. Just to give an example, if a person has an attachment to a certain job, he wants to get a certain job or he falls in love with a certain job, he's willing to take an education. In other words, it starts some sort of movement within this human being to take an education and to study. So what starts the movement? His affection for something. What keeps the movement going inside this person? His affection for something. Because he's in love with the result. He wants to see the result. He wants to reach the result. And therefore it keeps him going as well. And what gives direction to that movement in your life? What you are affected in. What you have an affection for. And what you have a love for. And what you have a desire for. Therefore you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He categorizes human beings in the Holy Quran, He does it based on what they desire. He said, تِلْكَ دَارُ الْآخِرَةِ نَجْعَلُهَا لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُرِيدُونَ عُلُوًا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فَسَادًا. He said, this is the hereafter, and the hereafter is for people who is not seeking exaltedness upon this earth, and not corruption. In other words, you can be the richest person in the world, but if you're not seeking exaltedness upon this earth, you're going to be amongst the people of the hereafter. And at the same time, you can be the most poor person in the world, but if you're seeking or having a desire for getting exaltedness or greatness in this world instead of the hereafter, you're not going to be amongst the people of the hereafter. In other words, it goes back to your desire, what you have an affection for, and what you fall in love with. So He gives two different things that He categorizes individuals in the Quran. First is their actions, second, what they desire. So even where you're going to end up in the hereafter is sometimes determined for what you desire. In other words, what you have an attachment and affection for and what you fall in love with. And the same goes for your mental health, dear brothers and sisters. Sometimes our mental health is also under the influence of what we have an affection for and what we fall in love with. Because if I have a strong attachment to a car, if that car gets scratched, it's not only the car that's getting scratched, my heart and mental health is getting scratched as well. That's why having an affection for something has an influence on our mental health as well. And that's why you see a lot of people, they're fearing death. What is death? It's a natural part of life, just like giving birth to a child, for example. It's one of the most natural things in life. But when we think about death, we see it as a bad thing. You know why? Because we have a strong attachment to our worldly affairs and we don't want to give up on these worldly affairs. Therefore, death is being seen as something negative, even if though it's a positive, it's a natural thing. But it goes back to our desires, what we have a love for, what we attach ourselves to as human beings. And that's why you see Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, when he talks about human beings, he describes human beings who has a strong attachment to their worldly affairs as walking corpses. He's saying that these people, they're walking and talking, but they're not living. هَلَكَ خُزَّانُ الْأَمْوَالِ وَهُمْ أَحْيَاء. A beautiful statement from Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali alayhi salam, where he said that people that are greedy and preserve their wealth or protect their wealth because they don't want to give out from that wealth. In other words, they're greedy, so they don't want to give out from that wealth. He said they are dead even though that they are alive. How can that be? That's a contradiction. No. He said even though they're breathing, talking and walking, they're not alive. This person is dead inside. His heart has died many years ago. And the same goes for people who don't have that attachment to their worldly affairs. What is the opposite? وَالْعُلَمَاء بَاقُونَ مَا بَقِيَ الدَّهْرِ. He said, but true scholars, they're going to live on as long as time exists. You know why? Because a true scholar, who is that? That's a person who knows what to have an affection in, have an affection for, and for what to fall in love with. And not to have a lot of information. You can have all the information you want in the world, but if you don't know what to have an affection for, you cannot use that affection, that information for anything. As Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam states, he says that an intellectual person is a person who can differentiate between what is good and what is better, and not between what is good and bad. That's a kid, even children can do that. That's not a difficult thing. A lot of children understand what good and what bad is, what bad things is. But as an intellectual person who actually understands what good and what is better. That's why a true scholar is a person who knows what to have an affection for and what to fall in love with. And that's why you see as well that sometimes our faith and what we believe in is also determined, or if not, we want to say determined, is under influence of what we have an affection for and what we fall in love with. Because when you start falling in love with something, you will be submitted to your desire for that thing. So that thing that you have a desire for would dictate what you actually believe in. That's why Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, when he gave the definition of deen, of religion, he said, هَلِ الدِّينِ إِلَّا حُبِّ وَالْبُغْضِ. Is religion other than love and hatred? Because you're going to believe in what you have and love for, what you're attached to, and you're going to hate what you disbelieve. Whatever you hate, you're going to disbelieve. That's why يَكْفُرُ بِالطَّاغُوتِ means to dismiss the taghut, because you don't believe in that person. You're not submitted to your desire for being like that person. You don't see that person as a role model. That's why our faith is sometimes determined on what we are attached to as well. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran, when He talks about being attached to someone in the Holy Quran, He explains it with the word wilaya, guardianship. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُم مِّنكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. If you turn towards these individuals because you have a desire either to be like them, or you have a desire for something that is in their position, you're going to be amongst these individuals. You know why? Because they're going to dictate what you believe in. They're going to dictate what you believe in, and therefore they're going to define your religion for you. You're going to be amongst these individuals because you have a desire for being just like these individuals. So our faith is determined by what we get attached to, what we have an affection for, and what we fall in love with as well. If we understand this point, then it will be a lot easier to understand how beautiful and how great the struggle of Abu Abdullah Imam Hussein alayhi salam were. How? Because Imam Hussein alayhi salam showed us the clear difference of being attached and in love with the Creator and in the creation. He showed us the clear difference. He showed us how love for the truth, for the absolute perfection, and for infinity can give you the strength and patience enough to endure, and have patience enough to face all the hardships in the world just because you are standing up in the face of oppression and standing against oppression. He showed us how to keep the heart at ease, and how love for the absolute perfection and for the truth can keep the heart at ease even when the blade of a murderer touches your throat. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam showed us the true meaning of separating between truth and falsehood. And that's why we see that the struggle of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam is so universal. It's not something that is limited to a specific time or geographical place. It's something that is universal, beyond time, because its values that is beyond time. And therefore the struggle of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is also beyond time. And it all goes back to that Imam Hussein alayhi salam was attached to and was in love with the Creator instead of the creations. But at the same time, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when he differentiated between the two forms of attachment, he also showed us how ugly and how terrible it is when a person actually becomes too attached to his worldly affairs and his material goods. And how he was capable of committing the worst crimes possibly in history of humankind just because he was attached to his worldly affairs. The people that martyred Imam Hussein alayhi salam, every single one of them were attached to something that it's in regards of their worldly affairs. Every single one of them. So the amount of corruption, just a little bit of attachment, a strong attachment for worldly affairs and the material can do and can create in this world. That's why I see a lot of the conflicts out there in the world. It all goes back to either greed or a person's desire for reaching a powerful status, power. It's about seeking a name, fame, a title. It all goes back because that's the things that actually are dividing human beings. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam, one of the things that made his struggle universal is because he showed what we should be attached to and what type of love that actually can unify humanity as a whole. Because the only thing that can be a common denominator amongst all human beings, all existence, is the creator of all existence. And whatever that divides us as human beings is our desire for something that is limited, the material, our worldly affairs. And not even enemies and friends, no, even family members, the closest family members, sometimes you see what splits them and what divides them is their desire for attaining something that is in regards of the material affairs or something that is regard of the worldly affairs. And this is the reason why this message of Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam is unifying, it's universal, and it's something that is beyond time and will continue. Because the message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is ongoing and continuous, because the struggle between falsehood and truth is also continuous. Every single one of us, we have this conflict within ourselves all the time. We're dealing with it every single day. What we should get attached to, what we shouldn't be attached to, what forms of love that are negative for us, what forms of love that is positive and benefiting us. And this is the difference. One of the aspects of Ashura, where that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he showed us the difference. He was like, this is the result of being in love with the Creator. This is the result of being in love with the creation. You're going to be amongst the worst individual. If not, you're going to have the potential within you. If not, it's going to show itself. You will have the potential. You will always carry around the potential in your heart because you haven't freed yourself from being a slave of your own desires. And that's the true meaning of Ashura. One of the aspects of Ashura that is unfortunately that is normally overseen and underestimated that we should discuss a lot. So what we can learn from this aspect of the struggle of Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam, we can go home and find out and write down all the different attachment we have, all the things we have an affection for, and find out whether it's actually benefiting us, benefiting our lives. If not, let's plan to get rid of that affection and what we have a love for. Because if it's not benefiting us, it's damaging us. And it's hurting our relationship to our Creator. And that will create a huge gap which gonna create some sort of potential within us that we always gonna carry around this potential to be a corrupt individual. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid that, inshaAllah ta'ala. ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.